In this week's Bizline, Prime Minister signs directive to enhance foreign investment efficiency. And later on, room for Vietnam, New Zealand to boost trade and investment ties.
Hello there, you're tuning into Bizline, our weekly economic journal on VTV International. I'm Hoàng Hằng, and as usual, we now take a look at news making headlines in Vietnam's economic scene this week.
Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh has signed a directive clarifying tasks and solutions to enhance the efficiency of foreign investment attraction in the new period. Under the document, ministers and heads of minister-level agencies, government agencies, and chairmen of the People's Committees of centrally run cities and provinces must promptly implement tasks assigned to them earlier in luring foreign investment. They were requested to prepare favorable conditions for investment attraction and business activities by promptly completing plans for the 2021 to 2030 period with a vision to 2050. The Ministry of Planning and Investment was asked to report on the feasibility of developing a law on venture investment while creating a database on Vietnamese enterprises that are able to become suppliers to foreign invested firms in specific areas.
The 15th National Assembly convened its fifth plenary session on Monday. This week, the National Assembly listened to a report on the results of the implementation of the Socio-Economic Development Plan and the state budget for 2022 and the first months of 2023. They also discussed a number of draft laws, such as the draft amended price law in which deputies and legislators looked into issues regarding electricity and airfare prices, and proposed measures for more efficient price system, the draft amended law on bidding, the draft amended law on the protection of consumer rights, and the draft amended law on electronic transactions. During the session, many deputies also discussed and agreed with the 2% reduction in value-added tax.
Vietnam jumped 12 positions in the latest Global Business Environment rankings released by the Economist Intelligence Unit, EIU, under the UK's Economist Group. The rankings, which measure the attractiveness of doing business in 82 countries and economies globally, showed that, over the past year, Vietnam has made the largest improvement in its business environment. The assessment is based on data collected throughout the year, considering factors such as global economic chains, inflation, the cost of living, fiscal and monetary policy, and economic growth. Vietnam's rise was attributed to its favorable policies for foreign investment and its status as an appealing alternative market for firms looking to diversify their supply chains in other Asian markets.
The State Bank will strictly handle banks that evade, delay, deliberately cause difficulties, or refuse to restructure repayment terms and maintain the same debt groups for customers. This is the main highlight of Directive Number 02 issued by the Governor of the State Bank, which aims to strengthen credit work and restructure repayment terms to support customers who are struggling. The State Bank also requires the chairman of members' councils or board of directors and general directors of credit institutions to supervise the implementation of the directive and take responsibility before the Governor of the State Bank for its implementation.
The Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development has granted back Dong Province 12 additional area codes for lychee cultivation, enabling exports to Australia and Thailand. Of the 12, 9 area codes are dedicated to growing lychee for export to Australia, while 3 are allocated for export to Thailand. Currently, the province has 110 area codes for lychee exports to China, 37 for exports to Japan, and 15 for exports to the United States. Approximately 81,000 tons of this year's harvest season are intended for domestic consumption, accounting for 45%, while the remaining will be reserved for export.
Those are some highlights in Vietnam's economic scene. Up next in our crosstalk, we will look into potential for Vietnam and New Zealand to further strengthen cooperation in terms of trade, industry, and investment. trade between Vietnam and New Zealand has grown strongly since the two countries established the strategic partnership in 2020 with an annual average growth rate of 14.2%. Recently, two agricultural products, lambs and pomelos of Vietnam, will have the opportunity to export to the New Zealand market. These will be the fourth and fifth fruits of Vietnam to New Zealand after mango, dragon fruit and rambutan. Overall, there is great potential for Vietnam and New Zealand to further strengthen cooperation in terms of trade, industry and investment. This has been affirmed at the 8th meeting of the Vietnam-New Zealand Joint Trade and Economic Commission held in Hanoi. To understand more about cooperation between Vietnam and New Zealand, we have invited to our studio Ms. Trudine Dobson, New Zealand Ambassador to Vietnam, to further talk about this topic. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, how has the Vietnam-New Zealand cooperation developed in recent years, especially after the two countries upgraded to strategic partnership in 2020?
Well, I'm pleased to say that over the last few years that we've continued to go from strength to strength. Of course, as you say, we had our comprehensive partnership in 2009. And then in 2020, we actually launched our strategic partnership. And that has just shown once again that there's always more depth, more breadth that we can add to the relationship. Now, of course, going into the COVID-19 pandemic, we were all a bit nervous. How would this mean the start of the strategic partnership would go? And I'm pleased to say that despite all of the challenges that COVID-19 threw at Vietnam and New Zealand, that we just have managed to get closer and closer. So all of the work that we were putting in since 2020 was able to be put up in the spotlight with those visits last year. And in particular, it's given some further impetus to that relationship, and particularly, as you mentioned, these new opportunities that have been brought to both countries. Now, those are just one small example. In almost every area, whether it's defence and security cooperation, whether it's our development program, people-to-people links, we have just continued to make progress. So I'm really pleased to say that from a comprehensive partnership, we stepped up into that strategic partnership and things just continue to grow.
Now, Vietnam and New Zealand signed several free trade agreements, including the ASEAN-Australia-New Zealand Free Trade Agreement, or the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, or CPTPP. So how have these agreements supported the trade cooperation between the two countries?
Some of the trade growth, that really impressive trade growth that you referred to earlier, we can absolutely attribute that to ANZFTA, as we call it, and CPTPP. Vietnam and New Zealand, due to those agreements, and then of course RCEP on top of that, are now two of the most economically integrated economies in the entire Indo-Pacific region. And both countries have taken advantage of that. That's what led to that trade growth that we've seen over the last few years. But also it offers more than just the bilateral trade growth. I think COVID again has shown us how important it is for us to have resilient economies and to make sure that we're a diversified economy. CPTPP trade was 26 billion, so greater again, which to me shows how well FTAs can work for countries like Vietnam and New Zealand, small and medium-sized countries, to help diversify trade, and that also means our economies become more resilient.
National Assembly Chairman met with New Zealand's Minister for Trade and Export Growth Damien O'Connor during his trip to New Zealand December last year. At the meeting, he expressed that Vietnam and New Zealand share many similarities in the agriculture sector, and there is ample room for trade to flourish between the two countries. The bilateral turnover of Vietnam, New Zealand has increased 4 times, and investment in the two countries has begun to expand. The two sides are working towards $2 billion in annual bilateral trade, but this target remains modest compared to the economic potential, and investment between the two remains low. Therefore, the two economies need to strengthen ties at both bilateral and regional levels to create a larger space for cooperation.
At the forum, National Assembly chairman suggested that the two countries still have a lot of potential for cooperation in the fields of tourism, startups, innovation, digital transformation, and the energy sector. He also affirmed that the National Assembly and government of Vietnam are striving to remove business barriers to create the best possible investment and business climate.
Trong thời gian tới, với sự cộng hưởng của hai điều tốt đẹp là quan hệ đối tác chiến lược Việt Nam-New Zealand và các hiệp định thương mại tự do thế hệ mới như CPTPP và RCEP, với không gian kinh doanh thuận lợi, rộng mở, đầy tiềm năng, tôi mong được chứng kiến niềm hứng khởi mạnh mẽ của các doanh nghiệp New Zealand đầu tư vào Việt Nam. Chúng tôi chào đón các bạn và sẽ cùng các bạn làm nên những thành công cao đẹp mới. Sự thành công của các doanh nghiệp New Zealand, của các nhà đầu tư New Zealand, của các nhà đầu tư nước ngoài cũng là cái thành công của chính mình.
At the forum, National Assembly chairman witnessed the signing of an agreement on importing New Zealand strawberries and pumpkins to Vietnam.
What can you say about the investment environment in Vietnam?
Vietnam is one of the strongest investment regions, markets, not just in the region, in the world. Says everything about how Vietnam is as an investment destination. I think, the experts say, you need to have a number of things. You need to be well integrated into global supply chains. Vietnam has that. You need to have modern systems. Vietnam has that. You need to be well located. That's an advantage that Vietnam certainly has over New Zealand. Policy stability, very important for investors. That's what they're looking for. Can they forecast if what they see today is what they're going to have in 5 years' time and 10 years' time? So Vietnam offers all of those things.
What do you think are the strengths of the economy in Vietnam, and also what needs to be improved?
There's always room for improvement, and every country strives to find that room for improvement, that marginal difference, which will attract that next big investor. One thing we're very focused on in New Zealand, the feedback we get from foreign investment coming into New Zealand, is trying to make that regulatory environment as straightforward as possible, so that investors know what they need to do. If there's criteria against which they have to operate, they need to know and understand what those are. New Zealand is famous for having what we call ease of doing business, one of the top countries in the world, ease of doing business. For Vietnam, and at least some of our investors and traders tell us that ease of doing business in Vietnam, that's an area where we could perhaps work together more. And if we worked with Vietnam, sharing some of our experiences, that would be another area where I think Vietnam could further show to its investors, this is a great place for you to be.
Former New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern on November 15, 2022 attended the Vietnam-New Zealand Business Dialogue on a strategic partnership in trade and investment during her official visit to Vietnam. The dialogue serves as a forum for policymakers in both nations' businesses to exchange ideas, seek business investment opportunities, and promote bilateral trade.
We enjoy a very high percentage of renewable electricity, in particular in New Zealand through hydro, and our target is 100% renewable electricity. We have a lot of experience in that space, and we've been through that. So I think what we can bring is a lot of experience to Vietnam.
Vietnam is New Zealand's 15th largest trading partner, with a total two-way trade turnover of $1.47 billion, an increase of 400% compared to 2009. In the past 2 years, trade turnover continued to grow despite the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. At the dialogue, businesses also discussed continuing mutual market access for agricultural products, especially given that many markets are currently shrinking.
It's slightly different here in Vietnam because of the different climate, but there are many technologies and systems that we can apply here, and we've had some long-standing partnerships, particularly in the dairy industry, where we can help increase the productivity of each and every cow, make them more efficient, but also help with the ways that we milk and manage those animals.
If I think about the dragon fruit project, where we're working together with Vietnamese partners to develop new varieties of dragon fruit, to look at improving the productivity. So Vietnam has some wonderful fruits that New Zealanders would love to have in their fruit bowl. And,
With the COVID-19 pandemic under control and the border reopening, businesses are expected to seize the opportunity for the two countries to develop tourism and promote cooperation in education.
Recently, New Zealand signed an agreement to open the export market to Vietnam's limes and pomelos. So how do you rate the quality and potential of Vietnamese fresh fruit to enter the New Zealand market?
I think when our former Prime Minister visited last year, she described the market opening for Vietnamese limes to New Zealand as being about green gold. She described limes as green gold. Now, the reason for that, of course, is that New Zealanders, we love food. We love food, we love our drinks. And we're known for being very good producers, and we are good at producing certain things, but limes are really hard to grow in New Zealand. You need a certain kind of climate that we only have for a very, very short period each year, and only in a very small number of regions. So that's why we talk about limes being green gold, because they're so expensive in New Zealand outside of the season. So Vietnam is going to offer us counter-seasonality. So when limes are too hard to get grown in New Zealand, we'll be able to access Vietnamese limes, which we know high quality product, and they're a really good product for export actually. But not just that, the tropical fruit. New Zealand is not a tropical country. We're a temperate climate. We can't really grow tropical fruit. Vietnam can, and does it extremely well. So Vietnam has the double advantage of being able to very cheaply and to a very high standard process some of the agricultural product that it has in Vietnam. Everyone knows I talk passionately about passion fruit, and I hope we can talk more about that further. But I love passion fruit, another fruit that's really expensive in New Zealand. We can grow it, it's so expensive. In Vietnam, it's so affordable and delicious, but it's really hard to export actually, for lots of reasons, lots of the pests to do in the fruit, because it doesn't travel very well. And so I keep saying to Vietnamese who work in the agricultural sector here, you need to be able to process the passion fruit, send it as a high value product to countries like mine that want to put it in our baking. We want to have it with our cookies and our cakes, but we don't need the fresh fruit for that. So bringing together those strengths of Vietnam, production and processing, is where for Vietnam too it has, I think, some of its most exciting growth potential.
On May 23, 2023, the 8th meeting of the Vietnam, New Zealand Joint Economic and Trade Committee, JTC, took place in Hanoi. The two sides were represented by Vietnam's Deputy Minister of Industry and Trade, Van T. Tang, and New Zealand's Deputy Secretary of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Vangelis Vitalis. At the meeting, the two sides agreed that economic relations have flourished since the signing of the strategic partnership in 2020 and celebrated the progression on market access for Vietnamese limes and pomelos, and New Zealand squash and strawberries, which were agreed late last year. In addition, the two sides agreed to continue cooperating closely on market access requests, customs cooperation, strengthening regional supply chains, and promoting investment opportunities for both countries.
The Joint Trade and Economic Cooperation talks are always a very important moment in the bilateral relationship between Vietnam and New Zealand. And the things we focus on are practical things, things that will benefit our businesses. So to give you some practical examples of what we did today, we talked about some of the customs procedures on both sides that would make it easier for our companies to export to one another. We talked about the need to have electronic certification.
Vietnamese people are very fond of New Zealand fruits such as kiwi and apples. So how do New Zealand feel about Vietnamese fresh fruit? Are they well received?
Same with rambutan, I've seen it in New Zealand in some of our very high-end supermarkets. So the really, really, really high-end supermarkets. I want all New Zealanders to be able to enjoy rambutan. They're too good. And you know that when you go to the supermarket, you are specifically buying that New Zealand apple because you know it's going to be high quality, you know it's safe, you know it hasn't been produced using a lot of pesticides. Same thing for us in New Zealand. Our New Zealanders will be going into the supermarket and going, I want one of those Vietnamese limes. That mango comes from Vietnam. I know that's going to be a good, tasty mango. So that's that sort of market knowledge and growing that branding that can work so well for both countries.
What do you think are the advantages and disadvantages of Vietnam's agricultural products compared to other countries in the region?
Vietnam, a lot like New Zealand, is really built for agricultural production. So you've got fantastic climate, you've got fertile soil, and you've got people who are really good at agriculture. So those are three of the biggest components, I think, to being successful. Vietnam has something that New Zealand doesn't. You have a market on your doorstep. We wish we had a China on our doorstep when it comes to agricultural trade. So taking advantage of those real strengths for Vietnam. The area where Vietnam has potential, I think, to expand and to grow is in innovation. So for New Zealand, that's been something that we've really focused on, coming at agricultural production from a research and innovation perspective. Always be innovating. Our kiwi fruit are famous everywhere in the world, kiwis as they're known. Started out just with green kiwi. For most people, the first kiwi they would have ever eaten was the green kiwi. Now everyone knows the gold kiwi, but that came about from innovation. That doesn't occur naturally. That product was developed for its flavour, for its texture, and it was developed by growers who said, I think we've got something special here, but we can do even better. And I think there's an opportunity to do that in Vietnam as well, with some of the areas where you're producing some of the world's best dragon fruit.
Agriculture and forestry is one of New Zealand's powerhouse industries. So how has New Zealand built such a successful agricultural model?
We have a natural advantage for all the reasons that I've mentioned, climate and fertile soil. You don't get to be the kind of producer and exporter that New Zealand is without really investing in that sector. And we've invested monetarily, obviously, but most of all we've invested knowledge and know-how. And we have put at the centre of our agricultural sector adaptation, adapting to the environment. A couple of good examples for you. In the 1980s, we went through a very difficult economic period, a very difficult time in New Zealand. And we went through a whole lot of economic restructuring during that time, including particularly in our agricultural sector. We ended all subsidies in our farming sector. Very painful for farmers. But we reinvested in innovation and research, science and research. What that meant was that we went, for example, from having 80 million sheep at the time, 80 million. We halved the number of sheep down to 40 million, but we doubled the yield of those sheep. So we had half the number of actual little sheep running around, but the amount of meat and wool that they had doubled. And again, we did that through science, research and innovation.
What does Vietnam need to learn from New Zealand to add value to its agricultural product as well as to develop sustainable agriculture?
New Zealand has been very focused on, particularly over the last 30 and 40 years, is taking a systems-based approach. Now that's systems in supply and systems in production. And the reason why that's important for New Zealand is that when people trust your system, it doesn't matter what the product is, whether it's sheep meat, whether it's timber, or whether it's fruit, whether it's an apple or a kiwi, they trust that our systems mean that we will have produced that product to the highest standard. It's safe, it's nutritious, it's environmentally sustainable as a product. And then they know that in its supply chain, so from the moment it's taken off the tree, if it's an apple, the moment it's taken off the tree in New Zealand until the moment it arrives on someone's plate here in Vietnam, that the system that's gone around that has been based on safety, on science, and has been well managed, creates trust with the consumer.
Meeting with Chairwoman of the Committee for Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade of New Zealand Jenny Salisa, National Assembly Chairman highly appreciated the cooperation between the specialised agencies of the National Assembly of the two countries. The National Assembly Chairman also suggested the committee pay attention to promote cooperation in science and technology, respond to climate change, cooperate in training UN peacekeepers, continue to consider market access requirements for other agricultural products of Vietnam.
On the same day, National Assembly Chairman Vang Den Hue had a meeting with New Zealand's National Party leader Christopher Luxon. The top legislator affirmed the importance Vietnam attaches to relations with New Zealand in all party, state, parliament and people-to-people exchange channels, including ties with different political parties of the New Zealand Parliament. In reply, New Zealand's National Party leader Christopher Luxon stressed that the two countries should step up partnerships in education training, people-to-people exchanges, and dairy production and processing.
Meeting New Zealand's Education Minister Chris Hipkins, National Assembly Chairman emphasized that education is an important cooperation area in bilateral ties. He added that about 3.5 million Vietnamese people will have demand for higher education by 2035. For his part, New Zealand's Education Minister Hipkins said New Zealand pays due attention to educational cooperation with Vietnam, and that the two countries still have much space to step up collaboration in this field.
Now, Vietnam and New Zealand celebrate the establishment of diplomatic relations in June, which is coming up very soon. And as the two nations are heading toward 50 years of diplomatic relations, how do you expect the cooperation between the two nations will develop in the future?
This is a really great opportunity for us to always, with an anniversary, to reflect back on our past, to reflect back on where the strengths are, and then to take that and think, okay, what does that mean for our future together? I don't want to give anything away yet, but we are absolutely looking at new areas of cooperation. That it will be a great opportunity to work in some of Vietnam's more remote provincial areas, working with female farmers, working with some of Vietnam's ethnic minority groups, for example. I'm Māori, I'm part of New Zealand's Indigenous community, and Māori economic development has been a real priority for New Zealand, for our government, ensuring that Māori can benefit from trade in the same way as other members of our community. And I know that for Vietnam that's been a concern as well, making sure that Vietnam's ethnic minority communities have the same opportunity for development as everyone else. We've learned some lessons along the way in that area, and I hope that's something that we might be able to work further with Vietnam on in the future. Tourism, of course, so important to both countries. Both countries very strong in tourism. But I think with climate change, with more green consciousness from tourists these days, I think that there's some areas around sustainable tourism that we could cooperate with. And I think there's new areas that are developing. One area that we talked about a lot this week with a visit of a senior official from New Zealand, digital transformation.
Well, once again, thank you so much for joining our BizLine program. Since establishing diplomatic relations in June 19, 1975, Vietnam has become New Zealand's 13th largest trade partner. The two-way trade hit $1.2 billion in 2022, up 14% year-on-year. Besides agriculture, two countries have planned to strengthen bilateral cooperation in trade, investment, clean technology, supply chain, education, aviation, and tourism. And on that note, we wrap up this edition of BizLine. Stay with us for more content, or if you're on the go, feel free to download our app VTV Go from App Store or Google Play, or subscribe to our YouTube channel VTV4 Go. Thank you for tuning in, and until next time.